March is Women's History Month. For 31 days, we celebrate women's achievements, but in some areas, we have a long way to go.
Gender equality is not a women's issue alone. It benefits everybody. That's a fact. It benefits everyone. Our society, our economy, and our country.
That was President Joe Biden delivering a speech on Equal Pay Day. This year, March 15th marked how many extra days the average American woman had to work to make the same pay as a man in 2021. That's 2.5 months. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, in 2020, the average woman earned 83 cents for every dollar the average man earned. Now, to better understand how we got here and how far we still have to go toward equal pay, we welcome Insiya Hussain. She's an assistant professor of management over at the University of Texas McCombs School of Business. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, Insiya.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yes, this may be a hard thing to answer, but why is it so hard to close this gender wage gap?
Well, a big part of the difficulty is that it's a complex problem with many reasons for the gap. And these can roughly be placed into two buckets. So first, women make choices, often driven by social norms and expectations, that prioritize their caregiving roles at home over career advancement. So this can include choosing jobs that have greater flexibility, but which might be less well-paying, or taking fewer career risks that might involve long hours or relocation. And then a lack of support for working mothers doesn't help because it forces women to make these sorts of trade-offs regarding their careers that they ideally shouldn't have to face. Second, you have bias and discrimination, which today is less likely to exist in very outright or explicit ways, but certainly exists in more subtle or implicit ways. So for instance, even when mothers of young children continue to work, they often encounter a penalty in the labor market. Women also face a double bind, where when they engage in certain behaviors to increase their wages, such as by negotiating their salary or generally being more assertive, they can receive backlash. They can be seen as less likable by their peers and their managers, and it's really hard to get promoted or win that higher wage if people don't like you at work. So really, there are many factors at play, which means there's really no one silver bullet.
So complex. All right, so overall, women make 83 cents to a man's dollar, but it is worse for women of color. How do we address these larger wage gaps?
Well, women of color certainly have their own unique challenges and experiences. That said, there are certain structural interventions that organizations can employ that are likely to work for women across the board. So for one, research has found that when there's low ambiguity about whether and what you can negotiate, the pay gap closes. So implementing salary and negotiation transparency is key. Second, you can adopt an opt-out versus an opt-in policy for promotions. Women are less likely to compete or self-promote under an opt-in promotion scheme where you have to sort of actively raise your hand to self-nominate for that promotion. But when the default is to be promoted and you have to explicitly opt out or request not to be promoted, that's when you see greater female participation in the promotion pool.
I'm sorry, Professor Hussain, we had created a graphic to go along with that. If we can, Mary, put that back up to show how different race groups for that. And we're going to go ahead and move along. The Biden administration has created steps for pay equity. It includes things like strengthening pay equity audits by federal contractors, beginning pay history for employee candidates. What are your thoughts on these strategies?
Well, I think these are really important strategies. We've all heard the saying, what gets measured gets managed. And so by implementing audits, we're able to systematically find and track instances of unfair pay discrepancy and then take steps to correct for it. Additionally, salary history should really have no bearing on what you should be paid in your current job for the work you're doing and the value you're providing. And so by banning investigations of pay history, we're able to break this vicious cycle where women are paid less today just because they were paid less yesterday.
Now, you may recall this. The U.S. women's national team put a spotlight on equal pay about a month ago. They reached a $24 million settlement in their lawsuit with the U.S. Soccer Federation. They were seeking $66 million. Former goalkeeper Hope Solo came out and said this actually was not a victory. It looked like one, right? Because it's contingent on a new collective bargaining agreement. So is this a big step toward equal pay, Professor?
Well, I think the answer is both. To start, the settlement does validate that the alleged pay discrimination was real and unfair, that there was merit to it. And also, because this is such a high-profile case, it sends a message to employers around the country to pay attention to issues of pay inequity. But at the same time, the fine print, the contingency, that is a disappointment. Like Solo has said, if the players had been successful via their previous collective bargaining efforts in negotiating equal pay, there would have been no reason to sue the Federation in the first place. So really, the jury's out, and it's not a true win until that piece is settled.